I still remember the sound of rain that morning. It wasn't heavy, just the kind that whispers against windows, gentle enough to make you think, and loud enough to make you remember. My name is Thomas, and this isn't a story about losing someone. It's about finding myself the moment she walked away. They say heartbreak teaches you who you really are, but in my case, it also showed me who others were, especially the ones I trusted most. That day, I stood outside the small cafe where Sadie and I used to meet every Friday. It was the place where we planned our future, dreamed about little things, a house by the hill, a dog, maybe a garden. I used to believe that love was enough. Turns out, it wasn't. When she walked in that morning, she looked different. Her hair was styled perfectly, her perfume smelled expensive, and her smile didn't reach her eyes anymore. She sat down across from me, her hands resting on the table, her diamond bracelet catching the light. I noticed it immediately. It wasn't mine. "Thomas," she began softly, "you're a good man, but sometimes love can't pay the bills." I remember how my chest tightened. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was just quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when your heart understands before your mind does. She said his name then, Elijah, a millionaire businessman, known in town for his sleek cars and louder lifestyle. She said he could give her stability, that she deserved more than uncertainty. I nodded. I didn't beg. I didn't argue. I just looked at her, really looked, and realized she was already gone long before that conversation. When she left, I stayed behind. I watched the rain slide down the glass, each drop catching the streetlight like tiny fragments of the life we were supposed to have. I didn't know it then, but my silence that day would be the beginning of everything, my pain, my growth, and the quiet revenge that didn't need fire or fury, only patience. Because what Sadie didn't know, what no one knew, was that the man she thought was just a struggling mechanic was actually the only son of Joshua Bennett, one of the richest men in the country. And my father had been watching everything, every choice, every betrayal, in silence. People often assume wealth looks like glittering suits, glass offices, and cars that hum instead of roar. But I grew up learning that real wealth doesn't always shine. Sometimes it hides beneath oil-stained hands and worn-out jeans. My father, Joshua Bennett, taught me that. He was a man of few words, quiet, strong, the kind of presence that filled a room without saying much. Everyone in town knew his name, but very few knew his heart. When my mother passed away, I was just 16. My father could have sent me to any university in the world, but instead, he did something strange. He handed me a set of keys to a small auto garage he owned on the edge of town. "This," he said, placing a firm hand on my shoulder, "will teach you more than any classroom ever could. You'll learn what it means to earn something, not just own it." At that age, I didn't understand, but I obeyed. That's how people started to know me, not as Thomas Bennett, the billionaire's son, but as Thomas, the local mechanic. And honestly, I liked it that way. There was something peaceful about fixing broken things, engines, headlights, lives. That's where I met Sadie. She used to work at the flower shop next door. Every morning, she'd come by with a cup of coffee and that bright smile that could melt away the smell of grease and metal. She had this way of making everything feel lighter, even Mondays. At first, I thought she was just being kind. But then, she started staying a little longer, asking questions about the cars, laughing when I got grease on my cheek. One day, she brought me lunch, a homemade sandwich wrapped in paper with my name written on it. That's how love began, quietly, like spring creeping in after a long winter. We didn't have much, but we had moments. Evenings at the lake, walks through the old park, dreams whispered in the dark. She'd often talk about the future, our future. She wanted a small wedding, a little house with blue curtains, maybe 2 kids. I used to look at her then and think, this is it. This is what happiness looks like. But sometimes, life tests you not through hardship, but through temptation. It started with small changes. She began noticing things she never cared about before. My old truck, my worn-out boots, the fact that I still rented an apartment behind the shop. Then came Elijah. He was everything I wasn't. Tall, confident, dressed in tailored suits, his watch probably worth more than my entire garage. He showed up one afternoon to get his car fixed. A limited edition sports model that gleamed like pride itself. Sadie was outside, arranging flowers. I still remember how her laughter changed that day. Softer, sweeter, different. Elijah noticed her, of course. Men like him always notice women like her. He came back the next week. And the week after. At first, I didn't think much of it. I trusted her. I trusted us. But soon, I started seeing them together talking by her shop, his hand brushing hers, that look in her eyes that used to belong to me. I didn't confront her. I just asked once, softly, "Are you happy, Sadie?" She smiled that same practiced smile and said, "Of course, Thomas. Don't be silly." But her eyes told a different story. My father saw the change too. He'd stop by the garage once in a while, standing in silence as I worked. One evening, he said quietly, "You love her, don't you?" I nodded. "And do you think she loves you?" I hesitated. "I used to." He sighed, that deep kind of sigh only older men give, the kind that carries years of lessons behind it. "Let people show you who they are, son," he said. "Then decide what they're worth." I didn't understand then how serious he was, because what I didn't know was that my father had already seen Elijah before, not as a customer, but as a businessman who'd once tried to manipulate his company into a deal that benefited only himself, a man of charm, but no integrity. And Sadie, without realizing it, was walking straight into that man's arms. The day she finally left, my father didn't say, "I told you so." He simply looked at me and said, "Now you know." That night, I sat outside the garage, listening to the hum of the city. The rain began again, soft, constant, familiar. I whispered to myself, if love was a test, I failed it. But if life is a lesson, maybe this is just the first chapter. I didn't know it yet, but my father had already begun something that would change everything. A plan that wasn't about revenge, but about truth. Because Joshua Bennett didn't just want to see if Sadie loved me. He wanted to see if I could still love without bitterness, if I could rise without hate. And the test was only beginning. People say time heals all wounds, but the truth is, time only teaches you how to carry them quietly. After Sadie left, the days blended together like watercolor, soft, blurry, almost beautiful if you didn't look too close. The garage stayed the same. The scent of oil and rust, the sound of engines coughing back to life. But I wasn't the same. Every morning, I'd still make 2 cups of coffee. One for me, one for a memory. And every night, I'd still look at the empty chair across the table, as if she might walk in laughing, telling me it was all a mistake. But she never did. The town, small as it was, made sure I didn't forget her. People talked. They always do. They whispered about how beautiful she looked on Elijah's arm, how she now drove a new car, how she wore dresses that shimmered like she was made of light. And I'd just nod, pretending it didn't bother me, pretending I was fine. But the truth is, it wasn't jealousy that hurt. It was disappointment, the quiet kind that sits in your chest and doesn't leave. Because I once believed she loved me for who I was, not what I had. My father noticed my silence. One evening, he came to the garage again. He didn't say much. He rarely did. He watched me change a tire, then said, "Do you still love her?" I paused. "I don't know what I feel anymore." He nodded slowly. "Then feel everything. Don't rush it. Pain, when carried right, can turn into wisdom." That was his way teaching without preaching. A few weeks later, the town buzzed with news. Elijah's company was hosting a charity gala at the Grand Marlow Hotel. Sadie would be there, of course. The invitations were everywhere, glossy, gold, arrogant. I didn't plan on going, but my father did. "Come with me," he said one morning, straightening his tie. "It's time you see something for yourself." I hesitated. "You know she'll be there." He gave me that calm, steady look. "That's exactly why you should come." The gala was everything I expected. Chandeliers dripping light, laughter echoing like glass, and people dressed in silk and secrets. I felt out of place in my simple black suit. But my father, he belonged anywhere. His presence alone was enough to turn heads. We hadn't even reached the main hall when I saw her. Sadie, she looked stunning. Her gown shimmered like champagne, her hair pinned perfectly, her smile bright, but her eyes, they had that same emptiness I'd seen before. She saw me too. Her smile faltered for just a moment, a quick, sharp crack in the mask. Beside her, Elijah turned, his arm wrapping around her waist in quiet possession. He recognized my father immediately. "Mr. Bennett," he said smoothly, extending a hand. It's an honor. My father's expression didn't change. "Mr. Clark," he replied evenly. "I've been hearing a lot about your ventures." "Only good things, I hope," Elijah said, grinning. My father's lips curved, not quite a smile. Things, yes? Good. That depends who you ask. I watched the exchange, confused. There was a current in their words, something deeper than what was being said. Then Elijah turned to me, his grin widening. "And you must be Thomas the mechanic, right?" He said it like a joke, like I was something beneath him. Sadie looked uncomfortable, but she didn't say a word. "Yes," I replied simply. "That's me." He laughed, clapping my shoulder. "Well, good to see you cleaned up. Maybe I'll bring my car in again sometime." My father's eyes glinted briefly, a look that said, "Remember this moment." That night, as we left, my father finally spoke. "Elijah Clark," he said quietly, "has built his empire on borrowed money and borrowed charm. He's clever, but greedy. I once gave him an opportunity. He used it to cheat others." I frowned. "And Sadie?" He looked out the window. "She'll learn who she chose." There was no anger in his voice, just inevitability. Weeks passed. Business at the garage picked up again, but so did the whispers about Elijah's company. Rumors of bad investments, mismanaged funds, a deal gone wrong. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just worked silently, steadily. One evening, my father called me to his estate. It was the first time I'd been there in months. He led me into his office, large, quiet, lined with books, and a single window overlooking the city. He poured 2 glasses of scotch, then said, "Thomas, I'm retiring." I blinked. "You're what?" He smiled faintly. "You've worked long enough in the shadows. It's time people know who you are." I didn't understand. "I've watched you these past months," he continued. "How you handled heartbreak. How you refused to speak ill of anyone. How you kept working when no one was watching." He turned toward me. "Integrity isn't built in success, son. It's revealed in loss." I didn't know what to say. He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a document, the transfer of ownership for his largest company, Bennett Industries. To me, my hands shook. "Father, he stopped me with a look. "This isn't about inheritance. It's about trust. You've earned it, Thomas. You're ready?" That night, I drove home with tears I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't pride. It wasn't victory. It was relief that I hadn't let bitterness turn me cold. A few weeks later, fate decided to cross paths again. It was raining again. I was closing the garage when I heard footsteps. When I looked up, there she was. Sadie, her hair was damp, her eyes red. The diamond bracelet was gone. So was the shine in her clothes. "Thomas," she said softly, almost like a prayer. For a moment, I couldn't speak. She looked smaller, not physically, but inside, like the world had finally caught up with her. "Elijah," she whispered. He left, took everything. The company's gone. The house, the car, all of it." I didn't say anything. The silence between us was heavy, but not cruel. She stepped closer. "I was wrong. About you. About everything." I looked at her, really looked. For the first time, I saw not the woman I lost, but the lesson I gained. "I don't hate you, Sadie," I said quietly. "I never did. I just learned who you are." She began to cry, then quietly, like rain hitting glass. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just needed you to know." I nodded. "You have it. But some things can't go back to how they were." She nodded too, knowing. Before she left, she looked around the small garage, the same one she once thought was too small for her dreams. And in a trembling voice, she said, "You always said you wanted to build something honest. You did." Then she walked away. Later that night, my father called. He already knew she'd come. "Did you say what you needed to?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Good, because tomorrow the board meets. It's time they meet their new CEO." That night, I stood by the window watching the rain-traced lines across the glass. And for the first time in a long time, the silence felt peaceful. Because I finally understood what my father meant all those years ago, that sometimes love isn't meant to last forever. Sometimes it's meant to teach you what you're worth. And when you learn that quietly, you don't need revenge. You just rise. Morning light crept through the window like a soft promise. That day felt different before it even began. The air was cooler, the sky clear, and for the first time in years, my reflection didn't look like a stranger. When I arrived at my father's estate, the gates opened slowly, as if acknowledging a change that couldn't be undone. Inside, a few cars were already parked. The board members, men and women who had worked with my father for decades. People who had no idea that the man they thought was just a mechanic's son was now the future of Bennett Industries. My father stood by the tall window, hands behind his back. The city stretched out before him like a kingdom he'd quietly ruled for years. "You're early," he said, turning slightly. "I didn't sleep much," I admitted. He smiled faintly. Neither did I. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. The kind of understanding between us didn't need words, just shared silence. When the meeting began, my father took the head seat. His voice, steady and calm, filled the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I've built this company on 3 things: trust, patience, and humility. Qualities that can't be bought, only proven." He paused, letting the room settle. "Today, I'm stepping down as CEO." A wave of whispers filled the air. Shock, curiosity. He waited for it to fade. "And my successor," he continued, "will be my son, Thomas Bennett." You could have heard a pin drop. Half the room turned toward me, disbelief in their eyes. Someone cleared their throat. "Sir, with all due respect, we thought your son was a mechanic." My father finished for him, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Yes, that was by choice." He looked at me, then back at them. "Thomas worked for years without using his name or my influence. I needed to know if he could stand on his own, if he could understand the value of people, not just profits. I've seen enough to know he's ready." I stood, unsure what to say. I wasn't used to attention, especially not this kind, so I did what I'd always done. I spoke simply. "I don't have big words to give you," I said softly. "I only know how to work. I've seen what happens when people choose money over love and pride over truth. I don't want this company to be about numbers. I want it to mean something." The room stayed quiet, not out of doubt, but out of thought. My father smiled, that proud, quiet smile I hadn't seen in years. "Then it's settled," he said. After the meeting, we walked through the hallway together. The light poured in from the tall windows, casting long shadows on the marble floor. My father said, almost to himself, "You handled that with grace. You didn't chase after revenge or recognition. That's rare." I looked at him. "Was this your plan all along? To hide who I was?" He nodded. "I needed to know the kind of man you'd become without the world bowing to your name. Money exposes character. It doesn't build it." He paused at the end of the hall. "And I needed to know what love meant to you." I frowned. "You knew about Sadie from the start, didn't you?" He nodded again. "I did. I wanted to see if she loved you or what you could give her. I hoped she'd prove me wrong." There was no anger in his tone, only disappointment, calm and deep. "She failed that test," he said quietly. "But you passed yours?" Over the next few weeks, I stepped into a world that once felt so far away. Boardrooms replaced grease-stained gloves. Meetings took the place of late nights at the garage, but I didn't change much. I still wore simple clothes. I still drove my old truck. I still greeted people with the same calm voice, because I didn't want to become what I had once despised, someone who measured worth in gold instead of grace. Still, news travels fast in small towns, and soon enough, everyone knew Thomas Bennett, the mechanic, was the billionaire's heir. It didn't take long before people started treating me differently. Smiles that once ignored me now lingered longer. Voices that once mocked me now softened. But not all change was welcome. One afternoon, as I was leaving the company headquarters, I saw someone waiting near the entrance. It was Elijah. He looked nothing like the man I'd seen at that gala. His suit was wrinkled, his tie gone, his eyes carrying the dull weight of defeat. "Thomas," he said, forcing a smile, "congratulations." I nodded politely. "Thank you." He laughed bitterly. "You must be enjoying this, huh? Watching me fall while you rise?" I met his eyes calmly. "Enjoying it? No, but learning from it." "Yes." He shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "You know, she really believed in me, Sadie. She thought I was different." "And were you?" I asked softly. He looked away, maybe once. Before I started chasing more than I could handle, his voice cracked slightly, not from pride, but exhaustion. "I didn't come here for pity," he muttered. "I came here to say, you won, you got everything." I took a slow breath. I didn't win, Elijah. I just didn't lose myself. He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded, a silent gesture of respect. When he walked away, it wasn't with anger, but acceptance. That evening, I found myself at the same cafe where everything had once fallen apart. The same corner seat, the same soft hum of background music. The waiter recognized me. "Haven't seen you in a while, Mr. Bennett?" I smiled faintly. "Just Thomas, please." I sat there, sipping my coffee, watching the rain again. And that's when I saw her, Sadie, walking past the glass window, holding an umbrella that trembled slightly in the wind. She didn't notice me at first, but when she did, she stopped. For a long moment, we just looked at each other through the glass, like two strangers, connected by a memory. Finally, she came inside. "Hi," she said softly, almost unsure if she was allowed to speak. "Hi," I replied, equally calm. She sat down across from me, the same seat she'd once left from. "I heard about you," she said. "The company, everything. You must think I'm the biggest fool alive." I shook my head. "No, Sadie, you just believed the wrong version of love." She looked down, her hands trembling slightly. "I thought love needed comfort, security, but I see now that it only needed truth." Her voice cracked. "You were the truth, Thomas." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said the only thing that felt right. "I hope you find peace, Sadie, truly." She nodded slowly, tears filling her eyes. "You already have, haven't you?" I smiled softly. "Yes," in silence. When she left, I stayed there for a while, listening to the rain again. The same sound that had marked my heartbreak now felt like a lullaby. And that's when I realized this was my father's real test. Not about business, not about inheritance, but about forgiveness, because power without peace is just noise. But silence after forgiveness is strength. That night, my father and I sat on the porch of his house, the stars scattered across the sky like old memories. He said quietly, "You handled it better than I ever could." "I just followed what you taught me," I replied. He chuckled softly. "No, son. You taught me something this time." I looked at him, surprised. He smiled, gentle, proud, tired. "You reminded me that kindness doesn't mean weakness, that the best revenge is living so peacefully that those who wronged you can't touch your heart anymore." We sat there for a long while, saying nothing. The world was quiet, except for the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hum of crickets. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the poor mechanic or the air. I just felt whole. It's strange how life slows down once the storms are over. Days start to feel softer again, like sunlight filtering through curtains, like breathing after holding your breath too long. Months passed since that night on the porch. My life looked different, but it didn't feel different, at least not in the way people expected. I didn't move into my father's mansion. Instead, I stayed in my small house near the garage. I still fixed cars sometimes, not because I needed to, but because it reminded me where I came from. There's something honest about working with your hands. It keeps you grounded when the world starts calling you sir. I remember one morning, a young boy came by the garage with his bicycle chain broken, eyes wide. "Can you fix it, Mr.?" he asked shyly. I smiled, of course. As I worked, I saw his mother watching from the doorway. She looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from doing everything alone. When I handed the boy his bike, she tried to pay me. I shook my head. "He'll pay me back someday, not with money, but with kindness." She smiled, and for a moment, I saw something pure, the kind of gratitude that doesn't need words. That small moment meant more to me than any boardroom applause ever could. Running the company wasn't easy, but I tried to keep it human. I didn't chase expansion or headlines. I focused on fairness, raising salaries, helping smaller businesses recover, giving people a chance the way my father once gave me. People started calling it the Bennett way. But I never wanted it to be about a name, just a reminder that power means nothing without empathy. My father would sometimes visit the office, sitting quietly in the corner, watching as I handled meetings. He didn't say much, but his eyes said everything. Pride, not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that sits behind a gentle smile. One evening, as we were walking through the company garden, he stopped beside the old fountain. "You've done well, Thomas," he said. "Better than I did." I chuckled. "You built an empire, Father." He looked up at the sky. Empires fade, but hearts can last through generations if you teach them right. He turned to me, his eyes softer now. "I wasn't always a good man. I chased numbers, ignored people. It took your mother's death and your strength to remind me of what matters." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. Sometimes silence is the only language love needs. It was around that time that I heard about Sadie again. A friend mentioned she had moved back to town, working at a small local school as an art teacher. Her life, it seemed, had found its own quiet rhythm. One afternoon, I saw her by chance at the farmer's market. She was helping a little girl pick flowers, smiling in that soft, unguarded way she used to. When she looked up and saw me, there was no shock this time, just peace. She walked over, holding a small bouquet. "For you," she said, handing it to me. I took it gently. "They're beautiful." She smiled. "I thought you might like the white ones. You always said they reminded you of calm." We stood there for a moment, the world quiet around us. She said softly, "You look happy, Thomas. Truly happy." I nodded. "I am. And you?" She hesitated, then smiled. "I'm learning to be." There was no awkwardness anymore. No unspoken pain. Just to people who had once shared a dream, now standing in peace with its ending. Before she left, she said, "Thank you for forgiving me." I smiled faintly. "You helped me become who I was meant to be. That's worth thanking you for." She blinked, surprised, and then she smiled again, that old, gentle smile. As she walked away, I realized something: love doesn't always end with forever. Sometimes it ends with understanding. Months later, my father fell ill. Age, I suppose, had finally caught up with him. I spent most evenings at his bedside, listening to his stories, not about business, but about life, mistakes, and moments he wished he could relive. One night, he looked at me with tired eyes. "Thomas, do you remember what I told you when you were 16? That working with your hands would teach you more than money ever could." I nodded. "I do." He smiled weakly. "It taught you better than I ever hoped. I just wanted you to know, I'm proud of you, son. Not for being my heir, but for being you." He passed away a few weeks later, quietly, peacefully, like a man who had finally put down every burden. At his funeral, I didn't speak to the crowd. I just stood beside his grave, one hand on the coffin, and whispered, "You taught me how to live. Thank you for letting me learn it my way." After his death, I took time away from everything: the company, the meetings, the noise. I went back to the small lake where Sadie and I used to sit years ago. The water was still. The air smelled of rain and pine. I sat there for hours, watching ripples move across the surface. It hit me then: life had come full circle. The same rain that once washed away my heartbreak now felt like a blessing. Somewhere deep down, I could almost hear my father's voice, saying, "Let people show you who they are, son. Then decide what they're worth." I finally understood that line completely. Worth wasn't about wealth. It was about character, the quiet choices you make when no one's watching. In the years that followed, Bennett Industries grew quietly under my leadership. No scandals, no noise. Just steady progress. I started a foundation in my father's name to help small-town workers start their own businesses. Mechanics, florists, teachers, people like the ones who shaped my life. It wasn't charity, it was gratitude. Whenever someone asked why I did it, I always said the same thing: because I know what it feels like to be overlooked, and what it means when someone believes in you anyway. Every year, on the anniversary of my father's passing, I return to that same porch where we used to sit. I light a small lantern and place it by the steps, and I whisper, "We did it, Father. We kept it honest." Sometimes I think about Sadie, too, not with bitterness, but with kindness. She taught me that love without understanding fades, but loss, when met with patience, can build something even stronger. It's funny how quiet victory sounds. It doesn't roar. It doesn't demand applause. It just breathes softly, like the peace that comes after rain. And as I look back now, I realize I never really lost anything. I only traded illusions for truth. Because in the end, Sadie chose a millionaire. But my father and life itself chose me. Not for what I had, but for what I'd become. I sit here sometimes in the quiet of my home, listening to the soft hum of the night. The world outside is still. The only sound is the gentle sway of leaves in the wind, the faint chirp of crickets. It's in moments like these that I remember everything, not with regret, but with understanding. Sadie once believed love could be measured by comfort, by luxury, by things she thought she needed. Elijah thought power was the ultimate measure of worth. And I thought love was enough to last a lifetime. I was wrong about some things, but right about others. Life has a way of testing us quietly, patiently, like a river wearing down rock. Sometimes the tests are loud and obvious. Other times they are hidden, woven into the everyday moments we barely notice. I learned that true strength isn't about wealth or revenge. It's about patience, integrity, and the ability to remain kind when others fail. My father, Joshua, gave me a gift greater than any fortune. He gave me the chance to prove myself not through inheritance, but through character. And in that process, I discovered who I really was. The garage still stands, the same old place where my life began. The company thrives quietly under my care, and the people who work with me know that respect and honesty matter more than titles or money. And when I look back at the pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak, I see it as a teacher, not a curse. Sometimes I think about Sadie. I hope she's found her own peace, as I have. I don't carry anger anymore. There is no need. Revenge is loud and fleeting. Quiet redemption lasts forever. I've learned that life isn't about winning over others. It's about winning over yourself. And when you do, you don't need applause. You don't need recognition. You just rise. The rain still comes, soft and steady, like it always has. It reminds me that time passes, but lessons remain. That what seems like a loss can become the most important turning point in your life, and in that understanding, I find peace. Because in the end, wealth can't measure the worth of love. Power can't define a man. Happiness isn't bought, it's earned through patience, integrity, and quiet courage. I am Thomas Bennett. I loved deeply. I lost, I learned, and through it all, I rose quietly, gently, and finally, fully. And that, I think, is the kind of victory that lasts a lifetime.